I found my dad's old journal. It changed everything I thought I knew about him. I lost my dad 6 years ago to a sudden heart attack. No warning. One minute he was working on the lawnmower, the next he was gone. He was 58. He was a quiet man. The kind of dad who fixed things around the house, said, "I love you" in the form of, "Did you check your oil?" and always sat in the same chair at the dinner table. I grew up thinking I knew him, but only in the way you know someone from routine, not depth. Last month I helped my mom clean out the attic. We found a box labeled in faded Sharpie, "Tom's Things, 1981 to 1993. Inside was his old college backpack, a few cassette tapes, and a journal. At first I hesitated. Holding the notebook in my hands, I could almost hear his voice saying, "That's private." My father was never the kind of man who kept his thoughts on display. He was steady, reliable, someone whose world existed in action rather than words. But the weight of the journal felt magnetic, pulling me in. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, dust motes floating in the sunlight, cutting through the small window. The cardboard beneath me creaked, the air thick with the smell of insulation and old wood. My mom was downstairs sorting through holiday decorations, humming softly to herself. And there I was, staring at a piece of my father I'd never seen before. I opened it. The first entry was dated October 14th, 1982. First time I told her I loved her today, didn't mean to. It just came out. She was laughing about something, how the microwave makes leftovers taste like sadness. I looked at her and just said it. She said it back, but I think I surprised her. Hell, I surprised myself. It was my mom, obviously. Young, unburdened, long before life built walls of responsibility around them. I had to pause after reading it, just picturing the moment. My father, awkward but sincere, blurting out the three words that would eventually shape my entire existence. I kept reading, each page peeling back a layer of the man I thought I already knew. The next few entries read like the thoughts of a young man teetering on the edge of adulthood, scribbles about exams, part-time jobs, and fears of not being enough. I'd never once thought of my dad as uncertain. He was always the man with the answers. If the sink leaked, he fixed it. If the car made a strange sound, he figured it out. But in those pages, he was a boy barely older than I am now, stumbling his way forward. One entry stopped me cold. It was dated 2 months before I was born. They said the baby might come early. I try not to show it, but I'm terrified. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail him before he even starts? She keeps smiling, telling me it'll be fine, but she doesn't see me sitting awake at night, running through everything I don't know. Fathers are supposed to be strong. Right now, I feel like I'm made of glass. I felt my throat tighten. My whole life, I believed my dad was stoic by choice, that he didn't feel worry the way the rest of us did. Yet here it was, written in his own hand, the quiet storm he carried alone. Another entry, dated the day after I was born, was short but powerful. "He's here. He's so small I was afraid to touch him at first. When they said he needed help breathing, I thought my chest would explode. Watching them put that mask on his tiny face, I swore I would never let anything hurt him again. God, please don't let me mess this up." I couldn't breathe for a moment. I had no memory of those first days, but now I could see them through his eyes. He hadn't been distant, as I once thought. He had been overwhelmed with love and fear. Entry after entry revealed a man who felt things with an intensity he rarely showed. How he'd stand outside my bedroom door at night, just listening to me breathe, even when I was a toddler. How he silently worried about bills piling up after being laid off in 1998, writing, "I can fix the faucet, I can fix the truck, but I don't know how to fix this." He's looking at colleges already and I feel like I'm failing him. And then there was the one about the night before I left for college. He'll never know it, but I stood outside his dorm after dropping him off. Just watched the window until his light turned on. That's when I knew he was going to be okay, and I wasn't. I had always remembered that night as routine. A hug, a be good, and him driving away without looking back. I thought he hadn't cared much. Reading that, I realized he had cared so much it broke him. For hours, I sat frozen in that attic, the journal heavy in my lap. I wasn't just reading words. I was meeting a version of my father I never knew existed. I flipped ahead and found entries that weren't about fear at all, but small bursts of joy he never said out loud. He said truck today and pointed at mine like it was a spaceship. I didn't know a word could break your heart open this way. We bought the cheap popsicles. He picked the red and let it drip down his wrist without noticing. I pretended not to notice either. He was building a fort out of couch cushions. No meeting on earth is more important than that. There were whole pages about things I barely remembered. Teaching me to ride a bike, my first school play, a baseball game we lost 10-1, but I hit a grounder that somehow rolled through two kids' legs. He wrote like every ordinary day mattered. He fell, scraped both knees, looked up at me, and chose whether to cry. I told him falling is part of it. He nodded like an old man. Brave isn't not falling. Brave is getting back on, between entries. The ink changed, from sharp ballpoint to a softer, almost smudged pen, like he'd written quickly on a lunch break or in the truck before coming inside. There were coffee rings on one page, a grease fingerprint on another. My father's notebook looked exactly like my father. Careful, practical, no ornament, until you look closely and realize there was tenderness smuggled into every line. Halfway through, tucked in the pocket, I found a receipt from a hardware store wrapped around a tiny Polaroid of me asleep on his chest. On the back, he'd written, best weight I'll ever carry. I sat there a long time holding that picture. I kept thinking about all the times he lifted me up by the armpits like I weighed nothing, and how at some point parents stop lifting you physically and try to carry you in other ways. There were harder pages too. Simmering anger he swallowed instead of serving. I came home wound tight today, almost snapped at him about the shoes by the door. Stopped myself. My own father would have shouted, "I don't want to be my father." I put the shoes on the mat and asked about dinosaurs instead. I had never heard him talk about his dad much. Just a few stray facts. Long hours, short temper. I realized this journal wasn't just a record, it was a quiet rebellion. Every time he chose patience was a promise I never knew he was making. He wrote about my mom in ways I'd never heard him speak. Ordinary affection turned sacred. She cut her finger dicing onions. I put a Band-Aid on and kissed her palm like we were 22 again. She rolled her eyes, but she smiled later, doing dishes when she thought I wasn't looking. She keeps us together without announcing that she does. No one claps for a spine. There were entries about money in the late 90s that made my stomach knot. Interview went nowhere. I told her it's fine, that something will come. It will. But tonight I lay awake and added numbers like they were enemies. He asked if we're okay. I told him yes. I'll sell the boat if I have to. He loved that boat. He won't remember it. He'll remember fishing with me from the bank anyway. We never had a boat. I never knew there almost was one. It's strange, the versions of your life that vanish before they exist. At the bottom of the box were the cassette tapes. 3 unlabeled, one with my mother's name in his cramped handwriting. I dug out an old Walkman from the same box, astonishing that it still worked, and slid the tape in. Static. Then his voice, younger and thinner, but unmistakable. He'd recorded a mix for my mom, Springsteen, Marvin Gaye, some awful 80s synth ballad, and between songs, he spoke into the built-in mic like a DJ for one person. Song 3 is for when you're convinced the microwave murders leftovers. He laughed. I'll make you fresh noodles when we're 80. I laughed out loud in the attic and then had to wipe my face with the sleeve of my shirt. Another tape was for me, recorded the week I was born. No music, just sentences of prayer disguised as instructions. Hey kiddo, you're sleeping while I say this, which is probably how you'll prefer to listen to me for the next 18 years. A soft breath. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I'm here. I know I'll try. If I ever look like I'm far away, I'm probably in my head trying to figure out how to be better for you. Nudge me back. I paused the tape and just sat with that line. Nudge me back. How many times as a teenager had I taken his distance as disinterest? How many dinners did I interpret as silence instead of effort? We spend so much of our lives misreading the people who love us because we expect them to love like we do. There was an entry about the lawnmower, the day that feels like a missing stair in my life. Carburetor sticking again. He came out to hand me a screwdriver without me asking, like he could read my mind. I almost said I was proud, and then I swallowed it. Why? What am I saving the words for? The last line hit like a punch. What am I saving the words for? He died later that summer without warning. The words he didn't say weren't because he didn't have them, but because he kept storing them for a future that never arrived. It made the small fatherisms I used to roll my eyes at suddenly feel like love letters I'd failed to translate. Did you check your oil? Meant I want you safe. Be home by 10 meant I want you back alive. You don't need the newest thing. The old one can be fixed. Meant choose durability over shine. It's how things last. He had been telling me how to live, and I'd been grading the assignments instead of learning the lesson. One section toward the end of the journal was a list. Only a list. No dates, just a header. If I forget. Beneath it, bullet points. Tell him I believe he's kind, not just smart. Don't let work make home, pay the tax. Keep a $20 bill in the glove compartment. Not for me. Say I'm proud out loud, not through chores. Apologize quickly. Dignity grows in the soil of sorry. Fix the sink, but also sit on the floor and build the fort. I read that page 5 times. I took a picture of it with my phone and set it as my lock screen. It felt like a map he meant to hand me, and somehow he still did. When I brought the journal downstairs, my mom was sitting by the window with one of the cassette cases in her lap. She looked at me, her eyes rimmed red, and patted the seat next to her. We didn't say much at first. She traced the plastic ridges with her thumb, the way you might touch a relic. Then she said, I used to tell him he was quiet. He'd smile like he was keeping a joke from me. She tapped the journal. Turns out the joke was a book. We read some pages together. Sometimes she laughed in recognition at a story I'd never heard, like the time the washing machine overflowed, and he used beach towels and a broom like a ship's captain bailing water. Sometimes she cried quietly at lines he'd written in the margins. She deserves better than my tired. I saw in her the ache of loving someone who loved you deeply but clumsily, and how that can still be a whole, sturdy life. When the sun dropped and the attic turned from gold to gray, I pulled out a notepad. I wanted to copy some entries for her. Frame them the way you might frame a certificate on the wall. Proof of effort, a diploma from the school of being a husband and father. I picked the microwave line, of course. I picked the best weight I'll ever carry. I picked the bullet list, if I forget. When I handed them to her later that week, she cried the way you cry when a ghost kisses your hand. Half joy, half grief that it isn't flesh. That night, after the house went quiet, I opened my phone and started writing my own list. Not because I'm a father yet, I'm not, but because one day I might be. And even if I never am, I am someone's son, someone's friend, someone who will forget if I don't write it down. Call mom on Wednesdays, even when you're busy. Tell people what you notice when it's good. Don't save the words. If you love someone, carry something for them without being asked. Learn to fix things, but also learn to say, I can't fix this alone. In the days that followed, the journal changed how I moved through rooms I'd known my whole life. I started noticing the tiny repairs everywhere. The cabinet hinge that never squeaked, the plywood under the sink that kept the cleaning bottles level, the pencil lines on the laundry room wall where he measured my height. I found a pencil still taped there, the stub of it worn flat on one side. I pressed it to my palm and tried to imagine his hands, the same hands that turned wrenches and flipped pancakes and squeezed my shoulder as if he could press courage into bone. Grief had always felt to me like a thief that stole at the door and ran, but reading his words made me realize it also leaves gifts in the mailbox months or years later. Unexpected, small, sometimes wrapped in torn notebook paper. I used to think I'd lost the chance to know him. He'd been here the whole time, hidden in plain sight. If there was a single sentence that rearranged the furniture of my memory, it was this one, near the very end. He doesn't know yet that you can love loud without being loud. I shut the journal and sat with that line until the house hummed itself to sleep. My father had loved loud. He just loved in verbs, in fixed hinges and oil changes, in getting up early and coming home anyway, in standing outside a dorm window until a light turned on. I had spent years wishing he'd said more without realizing he'd been speaking a different language the entire time. Now finally, I could hear him. The journal didn't go back into the box. It lived on the coffee table for a week, like a new piece of furniture we were still learning to walk around. Mom would pass through the room and lay a hand on it the way you pat a sleeping dog. I'd catch myself reading the same paragraphs as if repetition could stitch something closed. One afternoon, I made coffee and carried 2 mugs to the porch, where she was pruning the hanging fern my dad always managed to keep miraculously alive. I set the journal between us and opened to a page I dog-eared. "Do you remember this?" I asked. She leaned in without touching, the way you lean toward a fire. I read out loud. She laughed at the salesman when he tried to upsell us on the washer. "My husband can fix anything," she said. I pretended not to puff up like a parade balloon. "I can't fix everything, but I can try. Trying counts." Mom smirked. "He hated that washer. It sounded like a helicopter landing." Then her eyes went soft. "He loved being someone you could count on." We sat quietly and listened to the neighborhood sounds. Lawnmower 2 houses over, a dog 3 yards down, doing its daily commentary, a delivery truck rolling past like a low tide. I told her I wanted to see some of the places he'd written about, to walk the map he'd left in ink. She nodded like she'd been waiting for me to ask. We started at the little diner on Maple where the napkins always felt like recycled sandpaper. In the journal he'd scribbled, "Eggs over hard, toast burnt, best lunch of my life." She said yes to the apartment. The waitress, older now, looked at us with the kind of recognition that lives in muscle memory. "You Tom's people?" she said, already pouring coffee. She remembered how he always paid in cash, how he tipped even when he looked like he couldn't afford to. "He talked quiet," she added, "but he listened loud." I wrote that on a napkin and tucked it into the journal. From there, we drove by the old rental where the landlord never fixed the porch light, and my dad did it anyway. The window in what had been my room was smaller than I remembered, the yard patchier. On the side fence, nearly hidden by ivy, we found 2 faint initials carved into the slat, T+L. My parents' small rebellion against being temporary. Mom touched the letters and laughed under her breath, embarrassed by her younger self but grateful for her audacity. At the riverbank he'd mentioned, a place I'd forgotten until he reminded me, we stood on the muddy edge and watched a boy and his father cast a line. I remembered a phantom of a memory, a cold soda sweating in my hand, my sneakers wet, his voice telling me how to watch the bobber. I tried to match the memory to the entry. He didn't catch a thing. Neither did I, but he told me the water looked like melted pennies. I told him I agreed. I would have pretended to agree, even if it looked like asphalt. On the way home, I stopped by the hardware store and bought a new pencil. The old laundry room stub was too sacred to use. Back at the house, I added a fresh mark to the height wall for the first time in years, next to my last teenage line. It felt silly and necessary, like telling time to please keep moving, but more kindly. That night, I wrote him back. Not in the journal. I couldn't bring myself to write on those pages, but on a stack of printer paper I folded in half. I dated it and wrote, "Dear Dad," and then told him everything I wished I'd said when he was alive. How I had mistaken his quiet for distance. How the pencil in the laundry room was the most accurate calendar we ever kept. How I finally understood that instruction manuals and lullabies can come from the same mouth. I told him about the diner and the river and the initials under the ivy. I told him the thing I never said because we had both been saving our words. "I'm proud of you too." I tucked the letter into the back pocket of the journal and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I had set something down I'd been carrying too far. There were only a few pages left at the end, and I kept stalling before reading them. Some sentimental part of me thought if I didn't finish the book, my dad wouldn't be completely gone. When I finally turned to them, the handwriting was larger, lazier in places, like he'd been writing on his knees in the garage or on the tailgate at a ball game. One page was a list of repairs he meant to get to in the spring. Caulk the upstairs tub, fix the sticking cabinet, sand the porch rail. Next to each, in parentheses, he'd added a person's name, with Sam, or ask mom to choose paint, as if chores were just excuses to bring us together. Then the second to last entry, he's grown into a man I like. Not just a son I love, but a person I'd pick to sit next to, even if I didn't make him. I keep saving things I want to tell him for some big moment that never arrives. Maybe big moments are just a pile of small ones you didn't skip. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled and felt my chest ache. The last entry was short. It was dated a week before he died. Mower's coughing again. He handed me the 10mm like he read my mind. Think I'll ask him to teach me how to cook that pasta he makes. I'm learning to save less. That was it. No grand summation, no goodbye. Just a plan to eat my over-garliced pasta and an intention to spend his words while he had them. I closed the cover and pressed my palm flat against it, like you do with bread dough, to test if it springs back. I wish the book could make more pages under my hand. The next morning, I started doing the small things the list had taught me. I fixed the sticking cabinet not because it was urgent, but because he'd written it down like an invitation. I put a $20 bill in Mom's glove compartment while she was on the phone and didn't tell her. It felt like smuggling a tradition forward. I called my best friend and told him, specifically, what I admired about how he fathers his daughter. When he got quiet, I realized people aren't used to hearing the things you only say at funerals. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe love needs to be noisy while we can still hear it. A few nights later, I took Mom to the diner again. We ordered the eggs and the burnt toast without asking for it burnt. We taped a copy of his If I Forget list inside the cabinet with the mugs. I promised myself I'd read it every Monday, my own weekly reset. And I put a sticky note on the fridge that just said, "Don't save the words." On the drive home, Mom reached across the console and squeezed my hand like she used to when traffic made her nervous. "You know," she said, "he would have liked this version of you." "I think he helped," I answered. We pulled into the driveway. The porch light, his porch light, flicked on. I sat in the idling car for a minute, listening to the engine settle, and thought about that final entry. He'd wanted me to teach him pasta. I can't give him that night, but I can cook it for Mom and for my kids one day, and write the recipe down in my own scrawl with my own parenthetical names beside it. I can love loud the way he did, quietly, in verbs, in lists that end with people. Inside, I put the journal back on the coffee table. Not a relic anymore, a manual. And this time I promised myself I wouldn't leave the most important pages unread. In the weeks that followed, the journal became less of a wound and more of a compass. At first, I worried I was obsessing, circling back to it too often, reading until the words blurred. But slowly, it turned into something steadier. Instead of collapsing into tears, I started carrying the entries with me like instructions. If he could love quietly but steadily, then maybe I could too. I began writing small notes and tucking them into everyday places. A sticky note on Mom's bathroom mirror. "You raised us strong." A folded scrap in my niece's backpack. "Your laugh reminds me of Grandpa's." I didn't sign them, but everyone knew. And instead of rolling their eyes, they smiled. It was like giving out pieces of the journal, showing them that love doesn't have to be loud to echo. One night, Mom pulled out a shoebox of her own. If you're reading his words, maybe it's time you read mine too. Inside were decades of unsent letters. To him, to me, to herself. They weren't diaries, more like fragments she never gave voice to. "I wrote them when I couldn't say things out loud," she said. I read the first one, dated the year I turned 10. "Tom fixed the dryer tonight, but I don't think he knows he fixed me too. I was falling apart and he reminded me I'm not alone." I realized then that the house I grew up in was filled with silent words. His in journals, hers in folded papers. And I, the child, had lived between them, interpreting silence as absence. But silence isn't empty. Sometimes silence is storage. The journal also changed how I looked at my own life. I caught myself thinking, would I want someone to read this moment later? Like when I was too tired to call a friend back, or when I brushed off Mom's story because I'd heard it 100 times. If he had written everything down, what would my pages show? That I was too busy scrolling, too distracted, too hesitant? Or would they show that I reached out, that I said the thing, that I lived as if each entry mattered? I started keeping my own notebook. At first, it was awkward. My handwriting looked foreign to me, the sentences stiff. But after a week, it loosened. I didn't try to sound profound, just honest. "Burnt the rice again." Mom laughed, said it tasted like Grandpa's toast. Or, "Sat in the car 5 extra minutes because the radio played his favorite song." Didn't want it to end small things. But that was the lesson. Big love is built from small things repeated. There was one night I'll never forget. I had a dream about him. Not unusual, but this one was different. In it, we were sitting on the porch steps. He handed me the journal, only now it was blank. I panicked. "Where are the words?" I asked. He just looked at me and said, "They're not mine anymore." When I woke up, my chest hurt like I'd been running, but I understood. The rest of the pages were mine to fill. I started inviting Mom to join me in writing. At first, she said no, said she wasn't a journal person. But one morning, I found a page on the counter. She'd written, "Today I pruned the fern. It still leans toward the sun, even after he's gone." That single line meant more than paragraphs. She joined the chorus. One Saturday, I gathered my cousins and told them about the journal. I expected them to brush it off, but instead they leaned in. My cousin Mark admitted he still had Dad's old toolbox but had never opened it. The next weekend we did. Inside were tools wrapped in cloth, each labeled with tape. "Fix the porch swing. tighten the banister, change the oil. Every tool carried an assignment, a reminder that fixing things is just another way to say, I love you. Mark cried into a socket wrench, and none of us laughed. The biggest shift came the day I brought the journal to the cemetery. I hadn't visited in months, too raw. But standing there with the book in my hands, I didn't feel crushed. I felt connected. I read aloud one of the entries. He'll never know it, but I stood outside his dorm. My voice cracked halfway, but I kept going. And for the first time, I spoke back. I know now, Dad. I know you were there. I know you never left. It felt like finishing a conversation 20 years late. That night, I slipped the journal back onto the shelf. Not hidden, not sacred, just there, accessible. And I kept my notebook beside it. 2 volumes, side by side. His love written in past tense, mine unfolding in present tense. Together, they didn't look like loss anymore. They looked like continuity. And as I turned off the light, I thought, maybe one day someone will find my notebook. Maybe they'll say, I thought I knew him, but I didn't. Not fully. Not until now. And maybe that's the point. We can't know each other completely in life, but words saved and shared stretch our love beyond our years. Spring rolled in, and with it, a kind of lightness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't that grief had gone. It never does. But the journal had shifted it, given it form. Instead of a weight that dragged me under, it was something I could hold, turn over in my hands, learn from. I began sharing bits of it with people outside the family. A close friend was struggling with his own father's silence. He always said, my dad never talks, never says he cares. I showed him one of Dad's entries about standing outside my dorm room. My friend read it twice, then sat there quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, maybe my dad's got his own way too. It didn't fix everything for him, but it planted a seed that maybe silence isn't absence, just another language we haven't learned yet. One evening, I caught Mom reading the journal again. She had her reading glasses perched on her nose and tears shining down her cheeks, but she was smiling. When she saw me, she said, it's like he's still here, still talking to me. All these years, I thought I was the only one holding it together. Turns out he was too. We just didn't say it out loud. That hit me hard. Love doesn't always arrive in speeches or grand gestures. Sometimes it's tucked in handwritten lines, or in a man quietly fixing the toaster before work, or in a mother writing unsent letters. I realized my parents had been building a bridge of unspoken words between them for decades. I just never looked down to notice the structure I'd been walking on all along. Around this time, I started volunteering at a community center where teens came after school. One boy reminded me of myself at that age. Headphones always in, convinced no adult understood him. One afternoon, he asked offhand if I ever kept a journal. I almost laughed at the coincidence. I told him yes, and without over-explaining, I said it helps to catch feelings before they slip away. He shrugged like he didn't care. But the next week, he brought a cheap spiral notebook and a pen. He said, I'm trying that thing you said. That was the first time I saw him smile. It made me wonder if Dad ever realized how powerful his habit was. He hadn't just written for himself. He had written for me, for Mom, for anyone who might one day need proof that love existed even in quiet lives. His words traveled farther than he ever imagined. Months later, I finally gathered the courage to digitize the journal. I scanned every page, preserving the slant of his handwriting, the ink smudges, even the doodles in the margins. I made a copy for Mom and one for each of my siblings. When I handed them the flash drives, I thought they'd shrug it off. Instead, my younger sister cried and hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. She said, I never thought Dad paid attention to me. But here, look, he wrote about my science fair. He noticed that was the moment I understood the real gift. The journal wasn't just about me and him. It was a record of all of us, woven through his quiet observations. We'd each carried our own insecurities, thinking maybe he hadn't loved us enough or hadn't seen us clearly. But in his pages, every one of us existed, loved and noticed in detail. On the anniversary of his death, we did something new. Instead of gathering in heavy silence, we each read aloud one journal entry that meant the most to us. Mom chose the one about the microwave and sad leftovers. My sister read the entry where he worried about being a bad provider. I chose the dorm room one, of course. By the end, we weren't just crying. We were laughing, nodding, remembering. It felt less like a funeral and more like a reunion with him. Later that night, I sat at my desk, staring at my own notebook. Its pages were filling, slowly but surely. I wrote, today we read Dad's words together. He wasn't here, but he was. And maybe one day someone will read mine and feel the same. That's when I realized I wasn't just keeping a journal for me. I was keeping it for whoever comes after me. My kids, maybe, or some stranger cleaning out an attic decades from now. The words don't die with us if we leave them behind. The journal started as a discovery. Now it's a legacy. And sometimes late at night, I still dream of him. Always on the porch, always with that same quiet look. But now instead of handing me a blank book, he nods toward the one already in my lap, and I write. Because love, I've learned, isn't measured by how loudly it's spoken. It's measured by what we choose to remember and what we leave behind for others to find.